And welcome to another edition of Philips African Dialogues. I'm Samantha. Now, Africa's consumer-facing industries are expected to grow by more than $400 billion. That's between 2010 and 2020. That's after growing just shy of $570 billion in the decade 2000 to 2010. That's according to a report by McKinsey and Company. Now, there's been a shift in focus from value of African resources to the value of African retail. Now, this episode focusing in on Africa's retail reality. We'll move away from sweeping generalizations. We'll be focusing in on niche areas of opportunity in the retail space in Africa, hopefully dispelling some myths and look at the implications of all this for businesses' retail strategy on the continent. Joining me in studio, Paul Hobden, Sector Leader at Philips Consumer Lifestyle Africa, Mark Turner, Director for Africa at Massmart, and Damien Hatting, Associate Principal at McKinsey and Company, and Eddington Danda joining us from Nigeria. He is the Managing Director at TNS Nigeria, and of course joining us there from Lagos. Well, let's start off with you, Paul. Just looking at those numbers there, I said, you know, basically between 2000 and 2010, private consumption in Africa rising by $570 billion. And looking at the next decade, that's from measured from 2020, over $400 billion is what it's expected to rise by. So is Africa a focus area for Philips right now?
Yeah, I mean, Africa is certainly a focus area for Philips. You know, we're presented with a market that has the world's fastest growing population and the world's youngest population. Now, in terms of when you start to consider lifetime brand opportunities and portfolio opportunities, I think as with many other multinational companies, Philips has realized that there is an opportunity. But I think it's important, as you mentioned in your opening, to dispel some of the myths and the cliches. This is 53 countries. And whilst we've identified that there's certain commonalities that we're seeing coming through, for example, the importance of the family and the implications that that has in terms of some of the portfolio choices we make, and also the aspirational qualities of a brand and the responsibility that we have in terms of an aspirational perspective, the markets are very different. And for a company such as Philips, it's important to look at what are the drivers of quality and value that we need to consider when looking in this marketplace. So we can make a number of choices. So the first one, we obviously look at it very much from a city perspective. You know, where do we see pockets of opportunities within the cities?
So let's just pause on that point there, because you're taking it from the perspective where you're looking at allocating resources via country down to the city level. And that, of course, indicates that, you know, income levels in rural areas in Africa are very different and contrast to income levels in key cities in African economies. Is that an approach that Massmart takes, evaluating opportunities city by city basis?
Absolutely, and you know, with the size of the boxes that we're taking into Africa, the city has been the right strategy for us right now. So for the last 15 years, we've been focusing on what are the cities that can deliver the best advantage for Massmart.
I mean, just looking at your portfolio right now, you're in 12 African countries, and you know, everyone's saying, when are we going to see this sparkly Walmart factor coming to the fore, in the sense of, you know, double-digit growth figures that I suppose the market's waiting to see this Walmart factor, as I say. Has it come through yet? What about the investment period? I mean, can you give some guidance when it comes to that?
Okay. Well, it's no secret Walmart has bought Massmart for the Africa opportunity. It's been a process that we've been following for the last 15 years now of understanding the African market. And I agree with you, Paul. Africa is about different countries. It's 54 different countries with very different consumers. And I think where we've cut our teeth is we've started slowly, and that slowly has been good. We've been patient, and we've really tried to understand the markets we're going in. And we're poised now to go into some new markets and to start expanding in the markets that we really understand. And with Walmart's power, you know, with the money that we have from behind Walmart, with their expertise, you know, Africa's for the taking.
So what portion of sales comes through from Africa right now?
So we're
from a group basis.
So we're in a closed period now. What I will say is we have 44 stores outside of South Africa. We have 333 stores within South Africa. So a fair amount.
Yeah. I mean, from your side, Damien, that was a key point that McKinsey made, is, you know, just look at the opportunities on a cities-by-city basis, but also pointing out that it's not necessarily about the mega cities like Johannesburg, Lagos, we're obviously crossing there now. It's also, you know, medium-weight cities. You point to like Abidjan and Khartoum.
Yeah, look, the opportunity is fairly concentrated. So yes, Africa is a continent of 53 countries, but you're absolutely right. There are a few countries and a few cities that account for the bulk of the opportunity. 10 countries alone account for 75% of consumer spending, and then there are 50 cities across the continent which are over 1 million in population, and those 50 cities alone will account for almost, well, actually almost around 40% of growth over the next decade. So it's not just the mega cities, although those are obviously critically important too. It's also the second tier cities, and often the thing that's attractive about second tier cities is the competition, depending on the category, may be less intense in those second tier cities.
Before we get into that competitive space, let's just talk about the middle class in Africa and disposable income, discretionary income in Africa relative to European cities. What's your experience when it comes to that? And what are the differences between the African consumer, if you could generalize that, to more developed world consumers?
Well, I think the difference, I think, is in terms of how they utilize technology. And I think they've skipped a couple of generations in terms of the use of PC and laptop to access data. So I think the first one is we know the power and the importance of social media and internet penetration, and specifically via the mobile phone. And you know, there's 600 million mobile phone users, which is now greater than the UK and the US. So there are some interesting technological developments that brands such as Philips can certainly utilize in terms of marketing and gaining access. I think their view of a brand is quite different. I think there is an aspirational quality to the brand. What is interesting is the degree of brand loyalty in Africa appears to be much higher than we've seen in some of the other developed markets. And this poses quite a few interesting opportunities around relationship marketing. Word of mouth is very important. What we see is the importance of communities, the importance of recommendation to peers. So we have an opportunity to try to create one-to-one dialogue with consumers in Africa. And
that must be pretty tough.
It is tough. I mean, there's obviously opportunities and ways of doing that through social media, identifying some of the main sort of community groups that we can talk to, and it's all about the propositions that you bring into the marketplaces that you want to start to support and build the communities. So, for example, we have our community solar light centres. Now, these, in its purest format, is a solar light that lights up the centre of one of these communities. But what we've seen that does in terms of security, in terms of a period to study for longer, enhancing education, what it can do for healthcare, what it can do for increasing trade, you know, once the sun goes down. You know, there's a very strong social responsibility in terms of how we view the consumer and how we bring propositions to the marketplace that we don't tend to see so much in developed markets. So we tend to focus a lot on educating when it comes to kind of our strategies for communication, rather than a pure transactional relationship.
And I think it was in fact, just talking about education, P&G, when they went into Nigeria with diapers, their entire marketing spend was just on explaining what disposable diapers are and you know, how to use them in the Nigerian market. So on that note, let's move on to Nigeria now. We've got Eddington Danda, MD at TNS Nigeria, standing by from Lagos. Eddington, it's great to have you with us today. So let's talk about the Nigerian consumer, and one of the points that I picked up from McKinsey's survey is that only 1% agreed with the statement that international brands are more fashionable than local ones. How would you describe brand loyalty in Nigeria. Is that an issue that Nigerians like to support local retailers?
Indeed, yes. There are, in terms of brand loyalty, the Nigerian consumer is prone to adopt international brands. But at the same time, in terms of loyalty, once they've adopted a brand, it becomes their brand. But there are other issues that you also need to take cognizance of. We always face sometimes erratic supplies of certain brands or shortages, which ultimately forces people to switch from one brand to the other. And as well, even when you look at other major brands that are in the market, be it in beer, be it in tablets, or any other categories, they are almost like regionalized. We have a number of brands that have a larger footprint or an international, a national footprint. So in that case, in terms of distribution, yes, people want to have, they are so loyal to the brand. Mm-hmm. But because of shortages or erratic supplies, people are seen switching from one brand to the other.
Yeah. I mean, also when it comes to the Nigerian retail space, it's quite a fragmented market. Just looking at percentage market share of the top 6 retailers, only around 2% relative to South Africa, where the top 6 retailers have 50% market share. So very different to South Africa in that context. I mean, how does that affect large-scale retailers wanting to tap into the opportunity that the Nigerian market presents?
As of now, the Nigerian retail landscape is evolving. In what way? Traditionally, we've been shopping from the open markets. But as you might be aware, 73% yes of the consumers shop from the open markets. But now, almost like 62+% of the consumers, they are shopping from convenience shops or established retail markets. So in that case, what you need to do as a retailer or as a manufacturer or a retailer is to adopt a two-pronged approach. Because one, we have the middle and upper class consumers who patronize these shopping malls. We also have the bottom of the pyramid consumer who also patronize the open markets. And in that case, you have to have your brand available in 2 spaces. One, the open market, whereby the bottom of the pyramid patronize, and as well the established markets where the middle to upper consumer patronize. But as well, another word of caution is when you're understanding the Nigerian consumer, he might be an AB or an middle to upper middle consumer. Mm-hmm. There are certain commodities that they buy from the open market, whereas some of the products, they go straight to the established retail market, which is a function of either trust, genuinity of the brand, or trying to get as much as possible a brand that they can satisfy their needs.
Yeah. Talk to us about Nigeria, because Massmart has 2 stores there and you're building a 3rd. Tell us about the operating environment and what's your experience? I mean, who's the typical customer that frequents your stores?
So here's the first time we have a country where, so we're in Lagos, our first store. We've been there for 6 years. Our second store we opened last year in Enugu. 2 very, very different markets. What we're experiencing in Lagos is the real AB, the real upper income customers is frequenting that center. It was the first real shopping center in Nigeria. And really what's happening is they really trust us. It's been 6 years in developing that trust. But brands is what they're after. Mm-hmm. In fact, we've probably got the lowest private brand penetration in Lagos than we have in any of our markets.
You mean private label, Massmart?
Yes, so the brands that we would typically sell in other markets and do fairly well. They value brands typically because we're all about saving our customers money so they can live better. But it's all about the big brands in Nigeria.
Yeah, and that's perhaps also brands, Damien, is very much associated with quality. Something also that people pointed out, people will pay for quality. Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. It was one of the surprising findings in our research was there's a sort of very fine balance that needs to be achieved between the quality, brand, and price equation, right? So customers are obsessed with quality, I think it's fair to say, and it makes sense when you think about it. Customers are typically have low incomes; they can't afford to make a mistake, so they need to make sure that their initial purchase is the right one. So quality is key. And then brands are important because brands, at least to these customers, are an indication of quality. So that's where the brand angle comes in. Now, the interesting thing is when you ask consumers, would you be willing to pay extra for the brand you love and use? The answer is often no. So it's as I say, it's finding this balance between providing a decent quality offering with a brand that resonates, but still at a price point that African consumers can afford. And getting that correct is pretty tricky, as you can imagine.
That's right. How do you get that price point right? And as it's different by different country, I mean, how do you assess that? How do you arrive at the right price for your products?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I think the very interesting comment was the sort of the perception of the brand and the loyalty of the brand. And I think, with 100 years history in Africa, Philips is in quite a unique opportunity here. It's more about the value promise, I think, necessarily than focusing on certain price points. And it does vary by market, it does vary by category, but I think sometimes it was interesting, a comment made with regards to the portfolio in game. We kind of make a statement that we need to bring in innovation that's low cost, whereas actually we need to bring in innovation that makes a difference. And it was interesting, I was actually in the game store in Lagos, and I saw a young lady, she bought a Philips dry iron. Now, as a traditional UK consumer, this is what we would consider an entry product. And, just to observe her behaviour, she was at the fixture for maybe 5 or 10 minutes before finally selecting this product. And, I thanked her for buying Philips. And she was actually quite emotional. This was her first brand, her first entry into a brand, which she'd saved over a period of time. And they're investing in that quality. They're investing in that promise. And for us, it's about creating value as opposed to price points, and almost irrespective of income level, everybody has similar aspirations, and it's about how can we get access into a brand such as Philips on price point, on functionality as well. Yeah.
Eddington, what's the best way to communicate what your product does in Nigeria? I mean, what do you find from a marketing perspective really works for the Nigerian market, and what doesn't work? What have you seen when it comes to marketing that consumers miss the point on?
When you look at Nigeria, it's a complicated market, but there are 2 or 3 things that determine in terms of how you can reach your consumer. Firstly, there is mainstream media, which is radio and television. In terms of penetration, you would see that almost like 90+% of the people have access to radio and television in Nigeria. And then now when you look at social media per se, you would see that quite a number of people, in particular 28% to be precise, have access to social media, which in this case almost like internet. Now, there are also other avenues that you can reach your consumer, which is activation. How do you do activation? There are a number of platforms onto the streets, shopping malls, and into the schools. These are the number of platforms that you can reach your consumer. There are some areas where you can reach your consumer, but you cannot have a one-size-fits-all for the Nigerian consumer, because one, we have different social classes in the society, one. So depending on the social strata, you also have to tailor in your communication to fit a specific target audience. When you look at the youths in particular, the majority of them are strongly influenced by social media, in particular Twitter and Facebook. And in that regard, that's a platform to interact with their brands.
Yeah.
Just to give you an example here, penetration stands at 28%. 63% of the consumers in Nigeria from our digital life study, they go online daily. 24%, which constitutes about 1 in 4 of the Nigerian consumer, they are brand fans on social network. 1 in 5 of the consumer in Nigeria write about brands. And 37% of the consumer research about brands online. So these are a number of platforms that you can as well engage with the consumer, in particular the ones that are digitally active.
So we're going to talk about online in the second half of the show, but it's also about communicating, and there are 2,000 dialects across 53 African countries. So what does that mean about the packaging? And do you have to alter that do you do that at Massmart? Do you change the packaging? Do you change your communication for each market?
It's quite difficult. You know, when you're buying in bulk, it's very difficult to do that. It's all about getting the product to the customer at the most affordable price. So that's very difficult. In a market like Angola, where legally there has to be some Portuguese on the labelling, there we will, but typically we don't. But if I can just refer back to what Eddington was saying, what we find in Nigeria is our customers are coming in really knowledgeable about what they're looking for. And it's all about this internet. It's all about browsing. It's all about looking on the internet. And maybe just dispel the second myth tonight is that you can't sell rubbish in Africa. And you know, we're really finding that in many of our markets that if we have product that's out of date, particularly electronic items, our customers hammer us for it because they want the latest. They've read about it, they've seen it, they've traveled overseas, many of them, and they want the latest.
And just to pick up on that, the comment with regards to packaging. We also, I think, have a responsibility to maintain the consistency and the quality of the packaging as well. As you say, the consumers are well researched, well educated. So wherever possible from a packaging perspective, it's important to keep a consistent brand look and feel. But where we would certainly work with the likes of Game is how do we really start to localize kind of the in-store communication. And it's interesting that the final purchase decision is still very much made at that point of time in store. So I think we do have an obligation to create a consistency in terms of what the brand means from a packaging perspective. But then how we communicate that, you know, to the consumer, whether that's through Facebook, whether that's through online or through a loyalty program. I think that's when we need to be very cognizant of their specific values, the language that they use. So I think we can actually work it on two levels.
Yeah. Let's shift focus onto the cost side of operating in, say, a market like Nigeria. I mean, off air you were talking about just the cost on power that you spent in December alone because of the power outages. So what's your experience when it comes to that?
Yeah, so again, it's market by market. If I take the Ghanaian market, power's gone up 3 times in the last 3 years. So yes, we do have some real expenses that are creeping in Africa. So we spend a lot of time looking at how can we reduce cost wherever we possibly can, in our logistics, in our packaging, in everything, because it's all about getting that product to the customer at the most affordable price.
From an industry perspective, what did you find from the survey when it comes to the cost of doing business in less developed markets?
Yeah. The cost of doing business has come down if you look at it on a macro level. Many African countries are actively taking steps to improve the ease of doing business, you know, reforming their markets and so on, and I'm talking about it at a macro level here. When it comes to sort of the more micro level costs of doing day-to-day business, what I will say is that Africa, despite in many cases high costs, still offers extremely attractive margins. So, you know, what I think our advice would be, you know, costs are only going to go one way, which is down as infrastructure improves, as markets develop. Right now is the time to come in and establish a foothold where there's a first mover advantage and enjoy those high margins before the competition comes in and erodes them.
Another issue is getting access to quality location and the right location. So I'm going to throw to Eddington and talk to him about that. Eddington, what's your view on the opportunities when it comes to retailers getting their hands on the right piece of land and the right location to sell their brands into the market?
It's very, very, very important because, as you know, in terms of challenges for a movement for consumers, in Lagos, it's quite a busy or a hectic place. And as a result, you have to ensure that you have to get the consumer where they need the product most. Is it in traffic? Is it in their neighborhood? Is it as well within the community or the school child within the school premises? So it's very imperative to know. Sorry?
Is it a case of getting your hands on a piece of land in a very busy city that is hard to come by, so it's a space issue, or is it a cost issue the actual cost of the land?
The actual cost of the land is quite prohibitive. It's quite prohibitive because most of the land is state land. And in addition, whatever you find land that is not developed yet, it's owned either by individuals who are either absentee or some of them that are known. And as a result now, getting to develop that piece of land or getting your hands onto that piece of land, it becomes very costly. And in cases whereby there is available land for you to develop either the shopping mall or a building, the price is quite prohibitive.
So how do you get around that? I mean, if there's, there's a clear market there, how do you get around the issue of very expensive real estate?
There are a number of things that are happening, say, in Nigeria. When you go, Nigeria is very different, as I said earlier on. In some states, it's less populated, but in other states, it's heavily populated or densely populated. When you go to Abuja now, there are vast tracts of land that are open, that are still being utilized for shopping malls, among others. But at the same time, when you look to Lagos now, there are almost like land reclamation that is happening around the coastal areas, whereby either Julius Berger or the other companies, multinational companies, are getting into ventures to do land reclamation, whereby they're getting the sand from the sea and the building land. We have even land for the housing, which is almost like Banana Republic, Banana Island, recently created in Lagos. It's recreated out of nothing right in the midst of water. It's because of the prohibitive cost of land in Lagos. Yeah, these are other initiatives that are happening, but look at that land. It becomes available to the very, should I say, affluent people in the society. So the rest of the population still sticks with the land in the streets, with the purchasing from the streets, purchasing from the corner store, purchasing from the convenience shop. Yeah.
So how, I mean, when it comes to kind of a general perspective, I mean, how do retailers who see an opportunity, they see a clear market there, they see the demand, get around the issue of not having a space or having to look at a very expensive space where they have to set up shop?
Yeah, it's a very difficult challenge, in terms of, because there's multiple points of purchase for the consumer. You're talking about, open air trading, Spaza, you talk about sort of the local community stores. What we do know is we are seeing obviously a significant increase in what we would consider modern trade development. And in particular, I think to individually try to find retail space is quite a challenge. Which is where I see sort of the clustering of the sort of the mall concept really starting to be quite prevalent. But for a brand such as Philips, we've got to be cognizant of being available where the consumer demands the product. So in many cases, we will partner with local distributors who have that expertise in terms of identifying the required reach, but the most cost-effective way to be able to get these products into the market. And it's not business as usual for a brand such as Philips, because we've also got to take into consideration service. After-sales service is fundamental to one of the pillars of how we would bring product into the marketplace. So we always look at the dynamics of a distributor partner, that it's not just putting product into the store, but it's how do we then communicate that proposition, how do we then make sure that we service it effectively. And so there's, by country, you would look at the relationship between modern trade and traditional trade. You'd look at the growth rates, and then you would identify the right partners to be able to give you the reach that you would need into that market.
Damien, just before you leave us, just your views on modern shopping centres in Africa. Are they going to take off, do you think?
Well, I'll say one thing: the consumer demand for them is absolutely there. When we surveyed our consumers, one of the big things they said was, we want a modern shopping environment. We want the formal shopping environment. We might be forced to shop in markets today, but it's because the formal stores don't exist. It's not because we do that by choice. So the demand is there. I think the issue is going to be on the supply side, to be honest, and how quickly the real estate issue that Eddington was referring to can be resolved. a personal anecdote from McKinsey. I mean, we recently opened our office in Lagos, and the rentals we pay there are probably twice what they are in Manhattan. So that gives you some indication of the real estate issue that's faced there.
You see that as worth paying, and you have to be in that market.
Well, that's exactly it. So it goes back to my earlier comment. The cost of doing business may be high, but the margins are absolutely there to justify it.
We'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining us today. Damien Hatting, Associate Principal at McKinsey and Company, and of course Eddington Danda, MD at TNS Nigeria, joining us there from Lagos. A very big thank you to you, Paul Hobden and Mark Turner, staying with us for the next part of the show, and we're heading into a short ad break, so we'll see you after this.